It is every government's effort to achieve high levels of economic growth. It is every government's effort to achieve low levels of unemployment. It is every government's effort to achieve a level of price stability. Hello there. My name is Paddington Jerauni and welcome to Homeschooling Adventures. And in today's video, we are going to be looking at the concept of the new economic paradigm. Now, for the government to achieve these noble objectives, they generally have two types of policies that they have that are at their disposal. The first one is what is called the demand side policy, and the second one is what is called the supply side policy. Now, someone might be wondering what demand side policies are. Now, demand side policies, these are policies that are aimed at increasing the level of aggregate demand in the economy. For aggregate demand to increase in the economy, I think you do now understand that it is as a result of an increase in any one or all of the aggregate demand components that we once looked at in the previous videos. And an increase in aggregate demand will generally be as a result of either an increase in consumption spending by households, or it could be as a result of an increase in spending by government, or it could be as a result of an increase in investment spending by businesses. Now, government influences aggregate demand using what is called the monetary policy. And the second policy that they also use on the demand side is what is called the fiscal policy. Now, with the monetary policy, this is a policy that is prepared by the central bank of every country. And in the context of South Africa, it is prepared by the South African Reserve Bank, or what we call the SAB. We generally have two types of monetary policies that can be used. The first one is what is called the expansionary monetary policy, and the second one is what is called the contractionary monetary policy. Now, when we talk of the expansionary monetary policy, this is a policy that is intended at increasing the level of aggregate demand by increasing on money supply and also reducing on interest rates, while contractionary has the effect of reducing the level of economic activity. As such, it is employed when the economy is overheated and when the business cycles are at their peak. If you would still recall from our previous topics of the business cycle, you would understand that when the business cycles are at their peak, then the South African Reserve Bank would intervene into the markets through the use of a contractionary policy. So we are saying a contractionary policy is a policy that is used to cool down or to dampen an overheated economy, whilst an expansionary policy generally has the role of trying to steer the economy from the low levels of economic activity. Probably if it was in the case of a business cycle, then we'll be talking about steering the economy from a trough into a recovery. Then that's the policy that will be used as an expansionary policy. And then we also have, on the other hand, we also have what is called the fiscal. Now, when we look at the fiscal policy now, we are saying this is a demand side policy that seeks to influence the level of economic activity by looking at two instruments. The first one is taxation, and the second one is what is called government spending. Now, if it seeks to reduce on taxes and increase on government spending, then it's said to be an expansionary fiscal policy. And if it seeks to reduce on government spending and increase on taxation, then it is said to be a contractionary fiscal policy. Now, we do now want to look at our demand side graph. Now, we said demand side policies are aimed at stimulating the level of aggregate demand. Now, this graph that we have in front of us, you will find that we have our price on the vertical axis and we have our quantity on the horizontal axis, and then we have where it's starting from, which is our origin. Now, what we now know is at first the markets were at an equilibrium position, and this was at a point where the supply curve was meeting the demand curve. In other words, at this point E, that's where the market was at its equilibrium before the implementation of the demand side policies. And at that point, let's just check what was happening. The quantity that was being demanded was Q, and the price that the market was willing to pay for the products was P. Okay, and then when the government implemented the demand side policies, they increased the level of aggregate demand, and this resulted in a shift, a rightward shift, okay, of the actual demand curve from where it was from D to D1. Okay, so the demand curve then shifted to the right from D to D1, and at that point it created a new equilibrium, which was E1. Now supply did not change because these policies are targeted at demand. So let's just check what has happened there. Now we have a new equilibrium point, which is E1, and at that point the quantity that is demanded has increased to Q1 from Q to Q1. Okay, that's good news for the government because quantity has increased. But let's look at what has happened to the price. The price has also increased from P to P1, and this is bad news to the government. So the government would want to achieve increase in production, correct, but they wouldn't want to have the adverse effects of price increases, because this becomes inflationary. Okay, so now what do the government now need to do? We'll then need to look at that. But before we look at that, let's just look at the curve that we now have. Now we have a curve that is called a Phillips curve in economics. Now this curve is a curve that seeks to explain the trade-off between inflation and unemployment. In other words, when unemployment reduces, the rate of inflation, it always increases. And if the policy makers reduce inflation, then unemployment, it starts to increase. Now in the short run, but because demand has changed, but the supply hasn't responded to the change in aggregate demand, the Phillips curve will shift to the right. Okay, and then it will look like the one that we are going to look at now. And then you will now see that we now have, originally we had our Phillips curve, which was this green one, and we had this point that was labeled A. Now at point A, that's the point that we call the natural rate of unemployment. In other words, this is the point at which unemployment is at a certain percentage when inflation is 0. In other words, this is the rate of unemployment that has no effect on inflation. Okay, so in this case, our natural rate of unemployment is at 20%. Okay, that's the point that is marked A there. And then you will find that when the government implemented the demand side policy, because the supply did not respond on time, it meant that the demand just increased, and that forced this Phillips curve to shift to the right. Okay, it shifted to the right. Now when the supply curve, when the Phillips curve shifted to the right, what it has done now is it has created a new natural rate of unemployment, which is now point B. Okay, right? And then you would now find that at point B we have it means the NRIU, or the natural rate of unemployment, has increased from 20 probably to another figure, maybe 30%. Okay, unemployment. And then on the other side, now let's just check what has happened, because supply has not changed. So what it means now is the unemployment, the rate of unemployment is remained at 20%. Okay, because supply has not changed. So it means the businesses are not hiring more factors of production from households. So the same number of people that are unemployed, it has remained in that position. So now at 20%, the way we had the original NRIU, it would now mean that when we draw up in we draw up until we touch the Phillips curve, the new Phillips curve that I called PC1. Now at PC1, you would now find that NRIU is at a higher price, and originally it was at 20. Now because the Phillips curve has shifted to the right, it would now mean that we now have our rate of inflation increasing from 0 to 10. Now our rate of inflation has now increased from 0 to 10, but unemployment has not changed. unemployment has remained where it is. Why? Because the businesses are not yet hiring more factors of production from households. Okay, so it meant that the households have remained unemployed, yet the inflation has started to increase. Now, what is causing this? In chapters that will come, or in videos that will come, we'll look at what is called the demand pull inflation, and this one is one example of demand pull inflation. In other words, this is the increase in price that is driven by an increase in demand without a corresponding increase in supply. So this is what has happened here. And then we now want to move on, and we look at now our demand curve. Now, for government to be able to counter this negative increase in prices, as has been discussed in the previous graphs, it would now need to implement the supply side policies. Okay, now these supply side policies are aimed at stimulating the level of aggregate supply in the economy. Now, if the government then comes up with the supply side policies, generally looking at the reduction in cost of doing business, or improving the efficiency of inputs, or improving the efficiency of markets, it will cause the supply curve to shift to the right as well, because these policies are aimed at increasing aggregate supply in the economy. So it will cause the supply curve to shift to the right. But what we need to understand is, when supply then shifts, then it can only shift in the long run. In the short run, supply remains sticky. It's demand that changes, and then in the long run, then we can now have our supply curve then shifting. It then responds to the change in aggregate demand, but that only happens in the long run. So in this case now, in the long run, when supply then shifts to the right, it creates a new equilibrium position. Remember, our old equilibrium position was now E1 there, where D1 was meeting S. That's where we had our equilibrium position E1. Now, when supply then increases, okay, it shifts to the right, creating a new equilibrium position, which I called here E2. Now, at E2, let's just check what has happened. The quantity that is being supplied and that is being offered and bought in the market has increased to 6. Okay, that's good news for the government. But we also have noted now that the price that used to be at 15 has actually also gone down to 10. So that's good news for the government. So what it means now is, we now have at point E2, we have an increase in quantity that is being bought and sold in the market, and we also have prices remaining unchanged. Now, this was the original price that we had, which was 10 rands, and now it has gone down again back to 10. Now, this is what we are saying is called the new economic paradigm. Now, what the government here can now celebrate is, they've managed to increase on quantity produced from 2, where it was initially, to 6, where it is, without the negative effects of unemployment, because now more people are going to be employed, because businesses are going to increase on supply, without the negative effects of inflation. Okay, so now the government has actually achieved economic growth without the negative impact of inflation, and then they've also achieved low levels of unemployment, because now businesses are going to hire more factors of production from households. Okay, now if this has happened, now it would now mean that on our Phillips curve, okay, in the long run, our Phillips curve now, after the supply has changed, okay, our Phillips curve is going to shift to the left. Okay, now when Phillips curve shifts to the left, our original natural rate of unemployment was at 20, which was labeled A, and then now, because the Phillips curve has shifted to the right, it has created a new natural rate of unemployment, which is now at 10, according to my PC1 there. Now, what it would now mean is, we are now going to have low levels of unemployment without the adverse effects of inflation. In other words, there was no increase in in inflation, but unemployment rate has reduced. So in so doing, the government then would have achieved on its objectives of low levels of unemployment and low levels of inflation, and then at the same time they also have high levels of economic growth. Now the government would have achieved in its objectives. And then now someone might be asking, what exactly is the supply side policy? Now, in the previous few slides, we have already looked at some of the supply side instruments that the government can actually use, and we have identified. But now, what we need now to understand is supply side policies are policies that are intended at stimulating the level of aggregate supply, and the government does this by improving the efficiency of inputs. They also do this by improving the efficiency of the markets, and they can also achieve this increase in aggregate supply by reducing the cost of doing business. Now, on reducing the cost of production, the government in the context of South Africa has actually done this through what we call the cash incentives, and these cash incentives, they are given to businesses to try and reduce on their cost of production. And then this is done in a number of ways, but in the context of South Africa, I'll just give you two examples. The first one is the government, they have a program that is called the Critical Infrastructure Program. Now, this program is aimed at offering cash grants to projects that require new or improved infrastructure as a way of encouraging new innovations in the production process. And then they also have the second example that I can also give you, which is called the Foreign Investment Grant. Now, a foreign investment grant is a cash grant that is given to foreign investors who invest in the new manufacturing businesses in South Africa. Now, these are some of the policies that the government has actually introduced to try and support or to try and reduce on the cost of doing businesses in South Africa. Now, the second way that government has tried to improve on the supply side is is what is called through the improving of efficiency of the markets. Now, government does this through the deregulation of the markets. Now, when you say deregulation, we are saying it is the removal of regulations or laws that make it difficult for markets to operate. Okay. Now, when government removes these laws, they make it easier for new participants or new entrants to come into the market and also be able to produce some goods. And if we have more entrants in the market, then it would mean that we are going to have an increase in our aggregate supply. Okay. And the other way that the government has also tried to improve on the efficiency of the markets is through the encouragement of competition. Now, in the context of South Africa, the government has introduced what is called the Competitions Act number 89, and this policy was introduced, this act was introduced in 1998, and its main aim was to encourage competition and foster economic development as more producers gain access into different sectors of the economy. Okay, and then they have also done that by trying to level the playing field. Now, it generally happens that state-owned companies that operate in some industries tend to gain from more expensive equipment that they get through government funding, which is a benefit that private businesses do not get. Okay, and sometimes it then disadvantages those small businesses that want to compete in that same market. Okay, so it is now the government's effort to try and increase access to new technology, especially looking at the private businesses in trying to beef up and trying to level out the playing field, so that even those private businesses, small and big, will also be able to compete at the same level as the state-owned enterprises. first way that government can actually try to support the increase in aggregate supply is through what you call improving efficiency of inputs. Now, when you talk about improving efficiency of inputs, this is done when government offers free advisory services as a way of assisting private businesses to improve on output. Okay, government also offers human resource development through training in specific skills that are required by the businesses, and also allowing immigrants who have certain skills that are in short supply to come and work in the country, thus providing a quick response to the changes in aggregate demand. So these are some of the measures that are put in place by government to try and support the increase in aggregate supply. Now, what have we learned about today? We have learned about the two policies that are intended at achieving high levels of economic growth without the adverse effects of inflation. Now, in the new economic paradigm, we are saying economists, they discourage the fine-tuning of the economy using monetary and fiscal policies, but rather encourages the government or policymakers to use demand-side policies together with the supply side policies if they are to achieve high levels of economic growth without the adverse effects of inflation. Now, if you like the video, click the like button, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more videos that are following. Now, all the best in your studies. Thank you for watching. All the best. Good luck.